Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, Hurricane Ian passing through Cuba as it heads for the Gulf Coast of Florida. People in the Sunshine State boarding up and locking down while emergency responders begin evacuations from high-risk areas.
We expect to have to evacuate over 300,000 people, and it will take some time.
We'll look at the preparations underway to protect the state from this very powerful storm. The serious questions around a transgender clinic at Vanderbilt University, with the governor of Tennessee calling for a state investigation, and the president of the Southern Baptists calling transgender treatments for children frightening. The government of Iran cracking down as protesters rise up against the Islamic regime.
The pattern has been when the Iranian people get fed up and they take to the streets to protest the regime's policies. Immediately after, we see the regime use live ammunition against protesters.
We'll show you how the Iranian people are making their voices heard. And it's the biggest museum of its kind in the world, dedicated to the history of Jewish people.
So whereas there are literally hundreds of Jewish museums all over the world, this is the only one that attempts to tell the whole story.
How this museum tells the history like never before. All those stories and more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour with Hurricane Ian picking up strength as it heads toward the west coast of Florida. It is on track to make landfall near Tampa as a Category 3 or 4 storm by tomorrow. The storm is putting Floridians on both coasts under major flood threats, with high winds and heavy rain expected to start today. Abigail Robertson begins our report.
Tampa is preparing for what could be its first direct hurricane hit in 100 years, with parts of the city under mandatory evacuations as residents brace for Ian's impact. The massive storm moving over Cuba this morning is expected to gain strength as it heads for the Florida coast. The storm surge along the coast expected to reach 5 to 10 feet in some areas.
We expect to have to evacuate over 300,000 people, and it will take some time.
Many Floridians are scrambling to board up their homes, fill up sandbags, stock up on essentials, or evacuate.
First thing that's going to go is going to be power and then the water, so just make sure you have a little bit extra so you can take care of yourself and get out of town.
A Tampa hospital in the evacuation zone is putting up protective aqua fencing designed to keep the water out so they don't have to evacuate patients. Florida is under a state of emergency, with almost every area expected to feel Ian's impact of high winds and flooding. Around 7,000 National Guard members have already been activated.
What I'm most worried about are the fact that these storms are so unpredictable.
Operation Blessing is on the ground in the Tampa area, ready to help in the days to come.
Thanks to the support of Operation Blessing's partners, we are able to be here, ready to support the local community who will undoubtedly be affected by this storm.
As Hurricane Ian inches closer to Florida, NASA scrubbed their Artemis 1 launch, rolling back the $4 billion rocket from the launch pad. Just before dawn, Hurricane Ian made landfall in Cuba as a Category 3 storm with sustained winds of 125 miles per hour. It's expected to gain Category 4 strength as it travels over the warm waters of the Gulf. Reporting from Virginia, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
The governor of Tennessee and Southern Baptist leaders are going after Vanderbilt University's Pediatric Transgender Clinic. They are concerned about potential harm to children. Another problem, a video threatening staff members of faith who object to transgender treatments. Heather Sells has the story.
Not only is Governor Bill Lee calling for a state investigation into the clinic's medical practices, Southern Baptists are citing religious freedom issues after chilling videos uncovered and released by commentator Matt Walsh.
If you don't want to do this kind of work, don't work at Vanderbilt.
One video shows Dr. Ellen Clayton telling employees that it is, quote, problematic when they object to providing transgender care. Those treatments include hormones, puberty blockers, and surgery.
Saying that you're not going to do something because of your conscientious, because of your religious beliefs, is not without consequences, and it should not be without consequences.
Within hours, Brent Leatherwood, president of the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, blasted the clinic. He accused it of turning children into, quote, pawns of culture war experimentation. And he expressed equal concern about those of faith who object. Southern Baptist President Bart Barber also weighed in, calling transgender treatments for children frightening. And former Baptist President J.D. Greer called the revelations horrendous. The videos also show financial incentives, as one doctor gushed about how much the procedures bring in.
It's a lot of money. These surgeries make a lot of money. So female to male chest reconstruction can bring in $40,000. A patient just on routine hormone treatment, who I'm only seeing a few times a year, can bring in several $1,000s.
Now, in a historic move, Governor Lee wants to investigate, saying we should not allow permanent, life-altering decisions that hurt children or policies that suppress religious liberties, all for the purpose of financial gain. The Tennessee Attorney General's office told CBN News General Scarametti will use the full scope of his authority to ensure compliance with Tennessee law. Vanderbilt disputes the charges, telling CBN News that Walsh's posts misrepresent facts, adding that Vanderbilt does allow staff to decline to participate in care they morally object to, and that it doesn't discriminate against them.
TransBuddy provides trained peer advocates.
Vanderbilt, known nationally as a transgender leader, declined to tell CBN News how many children it has treated since opening its clinic in 2018. Across the country, more than 60 such clinics have popped up in the last 15 years. Vanderbilt and others maintain they treat an underserved and high-risk population. A growing number of U.S. doctors, however, point to the lack of scientific evidence for these treatments, which can permanently mutilate and sterilize children.
These treatments have gained rapid support in recent years from medical, political, and cultural heavyweights in the U.S. Now, the tide may be starting to turn, with states like Tennessee, Texas, and others pushing back. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Turning now to Iran, where the government is cracking down on the massive protest over the death of a 22-year-old woman in government custody. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke brings us this story.
The Iranian regime is using a two-pronged approach of force and repression. Iranian police are in the streets trying to stop the protests. At least 41 people have been killed since the demonstrations began. And the regime has now pulled the plug on the internet and social media nationwide, a tactic they've had success with in the past.
The pattern has been when the Iranian people get fed up and they take to the streets to protest the regime's policies. Immediately after, we see the regime use live ammunition against protesters, but also the regime cuts internet access.
The Iranian government shut off global internet access Wednesday for almost 80 million of its citizens. Still, outrage over the death of Mahsa Amini has only expanded. Iranian officials claim the 22-year-old died due to underlying health issues, but her family says that's not true. Now, thousands of brave Iranians continue to protest in her name, in some cases even driving back Iranian security forces. Women in acts of defiance burning their hijab or headscarves and cutting their hair. Across the globe, other protests erupting in solidarity.
I'm cutting my hair because many of my sisters in Iran, they gonna die.
President Biden himself weighed in last week at the United Nations.
We stand with the brave citizens and the brave women of Iran who right now are demonstrating to secure their basic rights.
The U.S. Treasury Department announced it would take action to expand internet services in Iran in an effort to support the free flow of information. Secretary of State Antony Blinken tweeting that a general license has been issued to provide the Iranian citizens greater access to digital communications. Elon Musk responding with, quote, activating Starlink.
Internet obviously is very important when protesters are trying to organize, and also when they're trying to share footage with the outside world of what's going on. So Elon Musk giving Starlink to Iran would be a true game changer for the Iranian people, and I hope he does it.
According to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Starlink is now active in Iran. For it to be beneficial to the Iranian people, however, terminals need to be delivered on the ground. Now, that's certainly not something that the Iranian regime would support, but it is considered to be a surmountable challenge. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Coming up, we'll take you to Tel Aviv for a fascinating tour of this state-of-the-art interactive museum. See the never-ending story of the Jewish people come to life right after this. Artifacts, stories, artwork, and interactive technology, they all combine to tell the history of the Jewish people in the largest museum of its kind in the world, located now in Tel Aviv. Julie Stahl takes us on a tour of Anu, the Museum of the Jewish People.
Anu, it means us. That's the name of the new Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv. Its goal? Tell the story of God's chosen people from Abraham until today.
It's the biggest museum of its kind in the world. So whereas there are literally hundreds of Jewish museums all over the world, this is the only one that attempts to tell the whole story.
The museum combines artifacts, stories, artwork, and innovative technologies to tell the good and sometimes difficult history of the Jewish people like never before. CEO Dan Tadmore believes this story is relevant to both Jews and non-Jews.
We refer to Judeo-Christian values as the bedrock of Western society. They are Judeo-Christian values. It's the things that we share. It's the values of the Bible.
The museum covers 72,000 square feet of exhibition space spread over 3 floors. One aspect features interactives.
So does your name come from the Bible? So let's punch in Jonathan. Here we go. And you will be happy to learn that Jonathan struck down the Philistine prefect in Geba, and the Philistines heard about it. Saul had the ram's horn sounded throughout the land.
And this one shows how to make ethnic Jewish foods from around the world. I think I'm going to go for the stuffed leaves.
Okay, let's go. So you get your list of ingredients, but now you actually need to work.
Uh-oh, okay.
You begin by putting the rice in the bowl. So drag the rice into the bowl.
Oh, okay. Add the ground meat.
Add the ground beef. Great. Now you're gonna have to grate the onion. So grate the onion, go back and forth on the grater. So this is fun, but it's also, you come away with a recipe.
More than 50 original films help tell the various parts of the story.
We're now on the historical wing, and this wing is a chronological track that begins with Abraham and ends with the establishment of the State of Israel and beyond. It's a 7-minute huge projection that tells the entire story of Jewish migrations through the ages.
The path begins with the 6th century BC exile of the Jewish people to Babylon.
Until then, all Jews resided in one place. So for 2,000 years and the present, Jews always live in diverse places.
And proceeds to include the first believers in Jesus.
And of course, the first Christians considered themselves Jews because they were. And so this is that part of history. This diorama tells the story of the competition between this newly founded religion, the cross, in front of a synagogue.
Visitors can learn about the Inquisition, how Jews in Spain were forced to convert to Christianity. Even though the dark chapters in Jewish history like the Holocaust are part of the story, Tadmore says the museum is about Jewish life.
When we look at Jewish history and Jewish life, we refuse to do so solely from the position of the victim. Jews have not only been persecuted and survived. Along the way, we've thrived and flourished.
The first Jews in North America established the first synagogue there in Newport, Rhode Island.
This is a replica of a letter written by George Washington to the Jewish community of Newport, in which he basically says the children of Abraham will always have a home in these United States.
Tadmore's favorite item is here in what they call the Hallelujah Hall, dedicated to synagogues around the world throughout the ages. Most of the congregations represented are still in use. This was one of the biggest synagogues in Warsaw, Poland, Blown up by the Nazis, the leadership hid the holy items before the Nazis arrived and then secretly sold them to feed the Jews in the ghetto.
So this is the actual object from a synagogue that was destroyed by the Nazis over 70 years ago. And it miraculously survived because a Swedish philanthropist acquired it. It somehow made its way to Stockholm, probably because you were able to dismantle it and send it, and it has survived. The synagogue didn't, the congregants of the synagogue didn't, but the menorah did. And so you asked me about my favorite object.
Tadmore says the museum is so big you can't see it all in one day, but that only encourages people to return again and again to interact with the never-ending story of the Jewish people. Julie Stahl, CBN News, the Museum of the Jewish People, Tel Aviv.
Still ahead, the dangers of modern marijuana. We're going to hear from a young man who became addicted to it and suffered from psychosis because of it. We've got that story for you right after this. Today's marijuana is not your father's or even your grandfather's pot. It is stronger. Decades ago, the THC content was 3%. Today, it's anywhere from 15 to 30%. A recent study found high-potency marijuana is linked to a greater risk of addiction. On this week's Healthy Living program, medical reporter Lori Johnson talks to a young man who not only became addicted to marijuana, but also suffered from cannabis-induced psychosis.
In my experience, cannabis-induced psychosis is something that happened from me smoking way too much marijuana. And it triggered my brain to go into a mode where, I was very manic, had very manic thinking, and then a lot of paranoid thinking in a short amount of time. And I believe that it's, more common in people with mental health issues, but I think that anyone is susceptible. And just in my experience, it's very scary for, the loved one involved, and it's very scary for the whole family, because it's just something that, you don't know if you're susceptible to such a thing. There are people who can smoke, their entire lives and do every day and never have any issues. And then there are people like me where in a very short period of time, my life is suddenly in danger. And no one could have saw it coming.
And when you say your life was in danger, in what way could you have died?
Right. So whenever I was in psychosis, whenever I was induced into psychosis by cannabis, I had, thoughts of other people wanting to hurt me, thoughts of the only way of, being safe was to end my own life. It went very quickly to suicidal thinking. And then I went to operate a vehicle and was just in a total blackout, and don't remember getting to where I needed to go, but somehow just ending up there. And I do have like brief memories of, swerving on the road and things like that. And it's really just a miracle that I'm still alive after an experience like that.
And this was not something that happened to you just one day, even though there was sort of a peak, a culmination of all this, where you were hospitalized in a regular hospital and then transferred to a mental hospital. But, you were talking about some of the symptoms. A lot of people watching might be like, wait a second, how do you know if you're experiencing this cannabis-induced psychosis? And you said you had manic episodes and also paranoid. Can you kind of drill down and describe exactly what a manic episode is? A lot of people don't really know what that means.
Of course. I can really only talk about it from my experience, of course. But from how it happened to me was, I had just decided to use this marijuana one day. And, I don't know what it was. I know that my tolerance was really, really high. I knew that I would have to, smoke more at this point, just to feel the effects for maybe 30 minutes to an hour. When at first, I could smoke one time and the effects would last for several hours. And so my tolerance had been so high at that point, that I was ingesting a lot more. I don't know if that's the proper term, but I was definitely consuming a lot more. And at this point, it was just one night. This manic episode led to me, thinking that I had all the answers. And it sounds really, really crazy because it was super skewed thinking. And so my manic episode was, thinking that I had all these answers for like what was, I guess, wrong in the world.
And to see how Zach beat the marijuana addiction, you can see also how he remained clean and sober by watching Healthy Living with Lori Johnson on the CBN News Channel this evening at 8:30 Eastern. You can also watch it on the CBN News app. Coming up, a NASA mission to an asteroid designed to help protect the Earth from a killer rock from space. We'll explain what the space agency was doing when we come back. Stay with us. NASA sent a spacecraft to an asteroid with the goal of ramming the craft into it, and last night they succeeded.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh my gosh. Oh wow. Awaiting visual confirmation.
All right. We got it?
You hear the cheers. The plan was to try to move the asteroid out of its orbit. The goal is to be able to change the path of a future killer space rock that might be on the course to hit the Earth. NASA employees celebrated with Mission Control's Elena Adams saying, "As far as we can tell, our first planetary defense test was a success. The $325 million mission was the first attempt to shift the position of an asteroid or any other natural object in space." Time now for your Tuesday Tweetable. I hope you are inspired by this truth and you will take the time to post, tag, tweet, and share it with those in your circles of influence. This may be a good time to stop waiting and start doing. After you've waited on the Lord and He's renewed your strength, now is the time to do something. In short, put feet to your faith and take a step to do what God has called you to do. He'll honor that faith, but it isn't faith at all unless you do the work to demonstrate it. That is going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. We thank you so much for watching. You can write us at newswatch@cbn.com. We look forward to seeing you right back here tomorrow. Goodbye and God bless.